Hello, and welcome to Collie Conversations, the podcast that's all about transforming your life with your Border Collie. I'm Gemma Fisher, your expert in all things collie. Whether you're dealing with reactivity, recall struggles, or just looking to understand your collie better, you've come to the right place. I'm here to help you turn those frustrating behaviours into wins with practical advice and real life solutions. If you haven't already, head over to our Facebook group to get your collie questions answered in my weekly live Q&A session. Plus, the group has training guides, my recommended resources from the podcast, and lots of other extra support and tips for collie owners just like you. Today, we're going to be discussing how to teach our collie to relax and chill out around our home, especially when we're trying to concentrate on work calls. So grab a cup of tea and get ready to take some notes. Let's get started. So first off, we want to make sure that we're choosing the right time to start our settle training, because obviously first thing in the morning when our dog has just woken up might not be the best thing. So I want you to start by thinking about a time when your dog would naturally be thinking about settling down. After exercise can be a good time. You know, when my dogs have come back in from their daily exercise, they are often thinking, oh, I'm tired, I could go and have a rest. But just be wary, because sometimes the type of exercise makes a difference. If it's something that's leaving them nice and content, that's brilliant. But if they're full of adrenaline, then that won't work so well, and then you might struggle with your settle training at that point. The other time that I often do this with my young dogs or puppies when I have them home for the first time is thinking about giving them a special chew that they don't normally have. And when they're settling down and they're really starting to relax into that, as I walk past, I'll just drop a treat down next to them. It's helpful from a resource guarding point of view as well. But it's a time when naturally they are feeling quite settled, feeling quite relaxed, quite chilled, because actually the settle, as we'll go on to talk about in a little bit, is more than just about a position that the dog is taking up. It's actually about kind of their emotional and mental feelings at the time. One thing to bear in mind, short and sweet is better. All right, quality is better than quantity in all dog training, but particularly with the settle, because to get a good quality settle from our dogs, we want to make sure that, as I say, they're just doing it for short periods to start with. I suggest, for example, when people start taking them out and about on the road, to think about going to a coffee shop and taking buying their coffee in a disposable cup as opposed to a cup and saucer, simply because it means that, you know, when the dog is starting to show signs that maybe they're getting towards the end of their ability to settle, you can just pick up your cup and off you go. Whereas, you know, if you decided that you were going to go out and meet family members, for example, for a 3-course meal, that's quite a long time to expect our dog to settle for the first time. So it's those sorts of things that we want to have in mind. Now, where to start your settle training is also one of the considerations that I would get you to think about. So think about from your lifestyle with your collie, because that will be different from, say, my lifestyle with my collie, to some of my students and their lives with their collies. You know, what do you want to be able to do with your dog? Do you want to be able to take them to the local pub? Is that something that, your local pub accepts dog, and that's something that you would like to be able to do with your dog? Is it that you'd like to be able to go and meet a friend for coffee, or stop at the coffee shop after you've gone dog walking? Different scenarios will be relevant for different people depending on where you live. My brother-in-law, who has my Fizzy, he loves taking her to coffee shops and to the pub. Like, it's an essential part of their lives together. But it's not for everybody. So think about, to start with, where it needs to happen, because that will make a big difference to where we start that settle training. Now, once you've worked out where you want it to take place, what's the smallest version of the scenarios that you want them to be settled in that we could set them up in? So, for example, if it's outside a coffee shop in the summertime, when the weather's nice, then maybe practicing a settle outside in your garden with your garden furniture is a really good place to start, because that's the smallest version, right? All right, it's a table and chairs. It's your dog maybe on a lead next to you. No distractions around. That's the smallest version that we could potentially give them to consider. Now, another thing that can be really helpful, particularly if the idea is that you want to take them out and about, is to have something like a special towel or a special mat to be the thing that always comes out when you are looking for the settled behaviour. So that is like an item which prompts that behaviour in them. And I remember with a group of students once suggesting that bath mats are really good for this, which might seem a little bit odd. You're like, bath mats, Gemma, that's not a dog bed. And you're right, it's not a dog bed. But bath mats are lovely because you can get really comfy ones in terms of them being quite fluffy. They're often easy to wash because, of course, they're going to be coming in contact with lots of moisture. And let's face it, our dogs often are going through puddles and whatnot. They might be a little bit damp. But they're also something that we can potentially impregnate with some smell as well. So scents such as Adaptil or Pet Remedy are scents that are designed to help our dogs, feel calm and feel settled. So, as I say, we can stack the odds in our favour with the behaviour like the settle if we use as I say, a physical prompt in as well as maybe our verbal prompt that we will use. And also think about, as I say, having some scent on that particular item to be able to induce some of that calm as well. Now, whilst we're on the subject of the settle, I also want to talk about the difference between a stay and a settle. Criteria matters when it comes to this, because for and you might have different words as well. So I'm just talking about stay for my word equals don't move until you're released and remain in that same position. So if I've left you in a down stay, when I come back, I expect you to be in a down stay. If I leave you in a sit stay, I expect you to be in a sit when I come back. Whereas a settle is really different. And this is, I think, why sometimes people struggle to teach it. The settle for my dog equals, it's like a mindset rather than a position. So the settle could be, you are sat next to me, you lay down next to me, you're stood next to me. The picture of a settle for me is a dog who is relaxed, they're breathing in and out, and they're calm and settled. They don't look like they're about to lunge or leap off or, cause a scene. And as I say, this is why I think people often struggle, because the criteria is trickier to train as it relies on our observation skills, our understanding of body language, and also the timing for the delivery of the reward. I think lots of dogs are really good at going, oh, like I've shifted around and I've moved a little bit. And then we go, oh, yes, I was supposed to be rewarding you for settling. So then what we end up doing is we end up rewarding them for movement as opposed to that relaxed and chilled out state of mind. Now, when I start settle training, I have done some bed training. So I'm going to talk about bed training and just how I go about that, because I think that's a really good and important place to start, because certainly bed training for my dogs is super important in a multi-dog household to be able to, if I see something, a conversation brewing between dogs, I can send them off to different beds. But in that bed criteria, there is some of the settle behaviour as well. So it's a really good place to get started. Now, I love to start with a bed that has a nice clear edge for bed training. All right. So either an edge which has sort of three sides to it. Obviously, the fourth side is where the dog can get in and out of the bed, or a raised bed where the dog is either clearly on the bed or off the bed. Having a clear criteria is really important at the beginning, and having that edge around there makes it really easy. So later on down the line, I might and I've done this before when I'm out somewhere teaching and I haven't got a bed or a raised bed handy. I'll put my coat down on the floor, and my coat can become the spot that my dogs then go and settle on. Now, with a coat, it's harder because they might have some of their body hanging off the end of the coat, or their front leg might be slightly off the coat. As I say, criteria can maybe loosen a little bit later on down the line, but when you start, it's really important to have a nice, clear, black and white, correct, incorrect, answer for the dog. Now, I'm going to assume as I go through this bed training that your dog knows how to lie down. But if they don't, this is also something that I would work on separately before starting the bed training. Now, I want you to set yourself up for success. You position your dog's bed between something such as your sofa and your coffee table. So you're creating a channel for the dog with the bed between you and them in this channel. Now, sit yourself on a stool, or if you're comfortable being on the floor, in front of the bed with some treats handy in a pot or a bowl. Then what you'll do is you'll throw a treat out for your dog behind the dog bed, all right, so behind the channel. And then as they finish it and then they turn back towards you, you're going to throw another treat just in front of them for looking back at you to start with. All right, that's the beginnings of that criteria. Now, if they take a step towards the bed, you're going to throw another treat. close by them to reward them for that. Not onto the bed. This is really important. I don't want to lure dogs onto the bed. I'm looking to shape incremental movements towards the point of getting onto the bed. So then if they take a step onto the bed, this is where you could throw a treat close to them to reward that. And then you're just going to continue rewarding for small movements, which bring them all the way onto the bed. And the picture is it's all 4 feet onto the bed. So it's either 4 feet into the bed, or if it's raised up and onto the bed. Then they might be stood looking at you going, well, this is a nice game. I quite like this. Then you'll just kind of wait them out, and you want to see, will they move from the standing position into a sit? Now, if they do that, you're going to reward that. All right. Again, after you've rewarded maybe 3 or 4 times for that, you just wait again and wait until they move from that sitting position into the lie down position. And again, then you start rewarding again. Now, you're not looking to cue them for doing this. So I have watched people do this before, and they'll start saying sit and lie down. I don't want to say anything to the dog. I just want them to think about what they're doing at that moment, and see if they can prompt my behaviour of releasing the treats for something that they do. Okay. What we are looking to do is shape their behaviour. So the final behaviour we're after is lying down on the bed and waiting there until they hear a release word which says that they can move. But the process of getting them to that point is rewarding small steps which take them to that final behaviour. So as I say, I don't want to name anything as we're going along. I just want the dog to think about, if I do this, ooh, look, she brings a treat out. Oh, if I do that, she brings another treat out. I want them to think about this like being a roadmap. So instead of being a sat nav and saying sit down and really getting involved in the process, I just give them the map and then let them think about how they're going to earn those treats. Now, when you're rewarding, reward them on the bed. So put the treats onto the bed, or drop the treats onto the bed, rather than directly from your hand into their mouth. Okay. That's what makes it about the bed rather than where the treats are, because some dogs can get really distracted by, oh, the treats are in your hand. And I don't want them thinking about your hand. I want them thinking about the magical place that is the bed. And once you've rewarded with between 5 or 10 treats with them lying down on the bed, then you're going to use a release word and throw out a treat behind them off of the bed to get them to move. And going to then repeat the process above until they turn back immediately. And, you don't have to reward the shaping bit because you haven't got time, because the dog has rushed back onto the bed and is now lying down in front of you. Now, this is the point where people start saying, well, Gemma, do I name it? Do I tell them bed now? I wouldn't immediately name it at that point. What I would work on is me being in different positions. So in the scenario we've described so far, I'm sat at the end of the bed. I'm quite close to the bed. So I might move myself a bit further back and see, does the dog understand it's staying on the bed that gets it instead of being lying down in front of me? I might sit myself up on the sofa. I might stand myself up. Then I might think about, moving the coffee table away. So now that the bed is in a slightly different position, I might move the bed into the middle of the room and see whether or not the dog still, orientates towards the bed. And I'm going to go through this process until my dog is like, yes, I understand entirely what you're up to. When you put this bed out in front of me, I'm going to go straight to it. And one thing I would say as well is I tend to use a bed which is just for the bed training to begin with. And then I roll it out to the behaviour, that behaviour out to the other beds in my house later on down the road. But to start with, it's just that particular bed. And then I put that bed away when we're not doing our bed training. It just makes it simpler for the dog. I don't want the dog, going to the bed and thinking, well, hang on a minute, she was really excited about that a minute ago. But she's not rewarding me now because, as I say, we're not training it. Then I would grow the distractions that I'd expect my dog to be able to cope with whilst being sent to the bed, and also, their ability to stay on the bed when there's different distractions around as well. And naming the bed behaviour is what I would consider primary school level behaviour, with distractions coming in from the sort of secondary school upwards levels of understanding. And obviously, secondary school level distractions wouldn't be they would look different to, say, PhD level distraction. So we would go through a thought process of what that looks like for that particular dog. Now, when I asked people in my Facebook group, I said, okay, so what particularly do you want to know about the settle? And somebody came back with a good question about there being difficult times of the day for their dog to be able to settle. And the witching hour was brought up. So the time in the evening when the dog is just bouncing off the sofa, it's really struggling to settle down. And everybody else is like, oh, for goodness sakes, I've walked you, I've trained you, I've fed you, all of the things are checked. But, as I say, they're bouncing off the sofa. So settling in the evening is sometimes difficult for dogs if they've had an overstimulating day. And one of the things that can sometimes go wrong with Border Collies is that because we think that they're really high energy, busy breed, we keep them very busy. And the trouble with being very busy all of the time is that then there's a lot of adrenaline in their system, and then it can be quite difficult for them to come down off of that high. So too much activity can actually lead them to being overtired and, as I say, making it hard for them to be able to settle. So if you struggle with the witching hour and you have this Border Collie bouncing off your sofa in the evenings, in addition to working on the bed games that I've just talked about, I'd also keep a diary for at least a week to track what's going on during the day. And in that diary, I'd be looking at times during the day where my dog barked. I'd be logging things like where we walked, what we did on our walk, who we saw on our walk. Was the mailman backwards and forwards that day? Anything that caused my dog to, take note of it, either by, jumping up at a window or barking. Those would be things that would go into the diary. And when I go back through the diary entries, sometimes I would find then we see triggers or activities which have led to our dog being full of adrenaline. And that's why they're struggling to switch off. So evaluating things like daytime rest and how settled they are during the day can really help with that evening period. And in addition, I'd also maybe consider things like, the dog's diet and whether or not that might be contributing to some sort of hyperactivity as well. Sometimes young adult dogs are still on puppy food, or they're on a quite high protein food, or it's one that's got lots of additives and preservatives in it, and that's having almost like a blue Smarties effect on the dog as well. So that's another thing that I might explore with one of my students as well. So coming on to PhD level distractions. So these are some specific examples that some of the guys in my Facebook group came up with. So things like cats moving around, either the sound of them jumping onto the floor when they're upstairs or watching them move around throughout a room. So for me, as I say, that's a PhD level distraction for some dogs. Most dogs, I would say, actually would probably find that a little bit tricky. So if it's the sound that particularly bothers them, and they're not very settled, because if they're very settled, they probably don't notice. But if they're not very settled, then there's a few things I might think about. I might think about sort of background noise to have going. So maybe a radio, having an Alexa play something in the background, maybe having a TV on low in the room, because that sort of background noise is likely to mask some of the like odd noises that might happen going on upstairs. Now, cats moving through the room, again, that's a tricky one, because that movement could potentially lead to a run, which for a Border Collie is very exciting. So that would be working on the dog's ability to be settled and remain on their bed whilst there's things going on. In the past, when I've worked on this with some of my online students in my membership, we've done things like ask for the cat's cooperation in terms of asking the cat to come in and eat a bowl of tuna, or something equally yummy that the cat likes to do, and persuade the cat that they are safe in that room whilst we're working with the dog. But we bring them in as a distraction. And I say with a cat, you can't control them as such, but maybe make it easier to keep them in one spot by thinking about the things that they particularly like. Another thing that came up was sneezing and coughing, and I've definitely heard of this before now, that sometimes that explosion that comes from us when we sneeze or we cough, that can really wind our dogs up. And one of the wonderments was, why is it happening? Why did they get so excited about this, but maybe not out and about? So certainly, I think when it happens at home, one of the issues for the dog is that sound might come out of nowhere, a bit like, as I say, the cat's jumping down onto the floor. So having a bit more noise going around generally can be helpful. The other thing, and this leads to some of the other things that were mentioned as well. So the phone ringing, a Zoom call appearing on the laptop, a microwave pinging, those kind of things, is at the moment, those sounds are leading to the dog going, oh, I don't like that. Oh, that either makes me uncomfortable, it makes me a bit cross because I was resting and it's woken me up. At the moment, it doesn't have a very positive emotional connection. So one of the things I would look to do, and this is the beauty of having things like, mobile phones on us that we can bring up different sounds on them, is I would, every time, that sound happens, I would have something like a really tasty piece of liver cake, and I would offer 2 or 3 bits of liver cake. Or my friend Holly Barker has a brilliant recipe that she calls doggy crack. And that recipe is on my website. And loads of the dogs think that is just absolutely brilliant. Doggy crack is a good name for it. So instead of then those sounds being something that make the dog go, oh, I'm having a negative emotional response to that, it becomes paired with something positive. And so we start to change the dog's emotional response that way. Likewise, with things like the doorbell ringing or somebody knocking at the door. One of my online students has been working on this, and I sent her away with the homework of choosing a different ring for her front doorbell. So the front doorbell that she had was causing her Border Collie to run round, to spin, to bark, and just generally get themselves all worked up. So she's found another sound, and what she's doing is she's pairing that sound with I hear that sound and I go off to my bed, and then I go and chill out on my bed. So over time, what will happen is that sound, instead of being oh, I'm getting really worked up and this is wearing me up and I'm very worked up and I have to bark and get very excited, it just means something quite different. It has quite a different emotional response attached to it. So that would be something that I would consider. Likewise, if you're working on that, and this is an important note as well, if you're working on that, having a sign up on your door which just lets people know to ring you or to leave parcels in a different place rather than knocking at the door, that's really important, because obviously if we're doing this training, what we don't want is that somebody uses the doorbell and undoes all of our hard work. So that's something to bear in mind as well. Now, visitors arriving was one of the things that was mentioned. And this is definitely a PhD level distraction. If it's particularly with our Border Collies, they can often go from one end of the spectrum to the other. So sometimes they'll get massively overexcited and over-aroused for somebody arriving. And then on the other end of the spectrum, they're like, oh my God, somebody is here. It's the worst thing in the world. So either way, we've got a lot of adrenaline bouncing around in that dog system, which, as I say, is a huge PhD level distraction. And as I say, if it's a dog that thinks that this is party time and wants to be involved in all of the fun and games that's happened when a visitor arrives, then one of the things that we potentially need to work on alongside our bed training is some different social etiquette to be to run alongside those situations, and that's definitely something I will cover in a future podcast, because social anxiety and social overexcitement is a big one. And as I say, that's a really big PhD level question for something like a settle behaviour. Now, I mentioned it as we were going through those distractions, but the question was put to me, why aren't some of these PhD distractions, why aren't they a distraction when we're out and about? And the simple answer is it's the environment. Okay, so when you're out and about, there are more things going on, and their senses, both their sight, their smell, their hearing, it's already busy with other things. So they're not going to notice those things in quite the same way, particularly if you're the sort of household that generally is quite a quiet household and there's not much going on. Any of those sounds are going to be really loud by comparison. So having, as I say, a little bit of background noise can be very helpful. The other thing to bear in mind is that some of those sounds may lead to your attention being taken up elsewhere. And I know a lot of Border Collies that believe that everything should be about them. And so if they believe everything should be about them and these sounds take your attention away from them, it can lead to them believing that actually they're quite a bad thing. So that's something also to bear in mind. And it might be that what they need to learn to understand, as my dogs do, for example, when they come and demo in workshops, is I'm paying attention to what you're doing. I'm holding a conversation over here, and I haven't forgotten you. Our connection is not broken. It's just that mum's attention is elsewhere, and it will be back. All right. It's almost like a mild form, I guess, of separation anxiety in some ways. That, as I say, the dog is worried that your attention, which they deem to be really valuable, is not going to come back to them. So it's one of the things, again, that leads to that negative emotional response that we need to change in order to be able to help them work through that. And that's it for today. Thanks for joining me. I hope this episode gave you that extra boost to make a difference to your collie's behaviour. Today's episode was sponsored by my Border Collie training membership, Collie Culture Club. In the club, you get video training review, community Facebook group, and Facebook Lives for Q&A, just like this one, as and when needed. And don't forget, you can find information about this and all the resources mentioned in the Facebook group. So head on over there now. And next episode, we'll be talking about how to have a relaxed, safe, and enjoyable Christmas with our Border Collies. So stay tuned. So until next time, stay focused on progress, not perfection. And remember, every small win counts.